my background is actually a little bit mixed. I have been an academic researcher actually quite a long time ago, which was probably more than 20 years back in time. So my expertise then, back then, was mostly on using AI for improving customer relationship management using sequential methods. So from there, I actually went into industry and actually started to get interested in how to overcome certain barriers to implementation of AI. And that's where I started to get interest in privacy by design, trustworthy AI, and AI risk management. So today I'm working at Datashift as a lead responsible consultant. So today I would like to present you actually a presentation where we will look into the need for a deep integration of trustworthy AI and AI risk management for all AI systems. The reason why I'm stressing all is actually, you might be aware that the AI Act is actually requesting the implementation of an AI risk management system for high-risk AI systems. So from my own expertise as a product manager and project manager in AI, I actually realized that there is actually a need for not only looking into how can we improve the trust in AI by improving explainability and so on, but also to simultaneously look into how it eventually reduces the discrimination, might enhance the adoption of the AI system, because it's much clearer to the end user and the operators how to use the actual AI system. Maybe before I continue, I'm also actually editor of the AI risk management standard that's being drafted at the moment by Sensenelec to support the AI Act. So therefore, I think we are here in a very good very good company, because you guys, you're all experts in trustworthy AI and to some extent also risk management. So today I would like to talk about how to integrate those two domains in the future and why that would be necessary. So first of all, I will go rather quick through the introduction. Trustworthy AI, I think most of you will know what it is, so I will go very quickly here. So trustworthy AI, there has been many definitions, but just coining two here. We have the definition of the high-level expert group, which indicates that a trustworthy AI solution is supposed to be lawful, ethical, and robust. And then on the other hand, there's a definition coined by ISO, which is actually indicating that the solution that is trustworthy meets stakeholders' expectations in a verifiable way. So to some extent, when you look at this, it might look like trustworthy AI is really about understanding the stakeholders' requirements. And the stakeholders could be legal stakeholders. It could be certain groups of, for example, consumer rights groups. It could be a very diverse group of stakeholders. In the end, what we try to do is actually we try to build AI systems that will meet all those stakeholders' requirements by actually improving potentially the design of the AI system. So here I will go very quickly. Again, in order to build then a trustworthy AI system, research has shown or identified different dimensions of trustworthy AI. So you are probably very much aware of the fact that there's abundant research on how to improve fairness. There's quite some research now on robustness, improving robustness, and so on. So there's different fields or subfields within trustworthy AI, which all look into how to optimize certain subdimensions of trustworthy AI. And to some extent, this feels to me like how to get the glass half full. So you try to improve the qualities, the trustworthiness qualities, which means that the system will respect privacy more. It will be easier to explain the decision made by a trustworthy AI system, and so on. In a nutshell, I will also not spend too much time on this, but trustworthy AI, you could say it's a combination of things. On the one hand, there's different trustworthy AI metrics. So they're dedicated privacy metrics, they're dedicated group fairness metrics, they're dedicated explainability metrics, and so on. There's also dedicated methods to actually optimize the design in such a way that the resulting AI system will actually be more private, will actually be more explainable, and so on. Last but not least, there's the concept of accounting for interactions between competing dimensions. So as you try to optimize privacy, unfortunately, this might have a repercussion on the explainability of the AI solution or the AI system. So in a sense, it has been accounted, or researchers in general are agreeing on the fact that maximizing on one dimension of trustworthy AI might not result in the entire system being trustworthy on all trustworthy AI dimensions. So that's in a nutshell, more or less about what is trustworthy AI, but again, you're the experts in that. In the past, I have been using this quite a lot, trustworthy AI. So in the previous company I worked for, it was called Justify. I was product manager there. And what we basically did, and actually Professor André Vitali might be very much aware of that because we had some discussions back then. What we did, we actually used a reasoning engine using symbolic AI to proactively adjust the AI design so it would optimize for trustworthiness. So at the initiation of the process, we would try to identify, okay, what are the trustworthiness qualities that you care about? Do you care about explainability, privacy, group fairness, and so on? To what extent are these important? So we would identify the trade-offs between those qualities. And then given that information, the actual data, and then the task of the AI system, whether it had to classify or make recommendations, we would actually dynamically design alternative AI pipelines by adding and removing certain blocks. And adding and removing certain blocks would, for example, be that we would add, for example, a resampling block, because we know from the input from the user that fairness is an important trustworthiness quality to evaluate the entire AI system on. So I will not go into detail here, but just to give you an example of how optimization of trustworthy AI might look like, and you probably have many more examples of that, but this is typically, this is one of the examples. Then turning to AI system risk management. So what I noticed is that AI system risk management is actually to some extent also related to trustworthy AI, but yet it's not the same. And I will come back to that point later, but let's first have a look at AI system risk management. So when it comes to risk management, the AI Act actually, if you look at the history, it first started off with a high-level expert group who coined the principles of trustworthy AI. But later on, when actually the AI Act was created, we actually shifted a little bit to a risk management approach, which doesn't mean that trustworthy AI is no longer important, because there is both a trustworthiness AI standard being drafted as well as an AI risk management standard. Let me first clarify the definition of risk management by the harmonized standard that we are drafting for in light of providing presumption of conformity with the AI Act. So within that current draft standard, we are saying that risk management is actually a systematic and continuous application of management policies, procedures, and practices to the tasks of analyzing, evaluating, controlling, and monitoring risk throughout the entire life cycle of an AI system. There's also the concept of prioritization of which risks to treat. So here on the left-hand side, you see one of the standards that are useful. There's other standards that are useful as well, but this is just one example of how the risk management process looks like, where you have a risk assessment, where you try to identify all the risks that are relevant for a certain use case. And then you do risk analysis to estimate what is the severity and the probability of a certain risk, for example. And then in the risk evaluation, you will also look into, okay, which risks are acceptable and which risks are unfortunately not acceptable and hence need to be treated in the risk treatment phase. And obviously there's some interaction going on between subphases here, but in light of keeping the process simple, this is not displayed in this process diagram. So what I also noticed is that actually when you look at risk management, it depends on which standard you're looking at, whether risk actually is only considered with avoiding harm, or whether it also actually includes trying to look into the benefits as well. So for example, if you look at ISO 14971, on the use of risk management for medical devices, there you will see that in the risk, there is a recommendation actually to use risk-benefit analysis as part of the risk evaluation. So it might be that in the end, you still decide that a certain medical device can be put into the market because the benefits are outweighing the residual risks after controlling certain risks. So this is an interesting concept because it is the whole concept of benefits is actually also related to trustworthy AI if you think about it. So what is the key question I would like to talk about today is actually the following question. Does optimizing the trustworthiness of an AI system also mean its risks are managed? And I think this is actually a question that we really need to take very serious. So some key questions I listed to help us think about this. So when I started as a product manager at Justify, we basically vaguely assumed that when maximizing trustworthiness, that automatically we would also reduce certain risks. To some extent, it might be worthwhile to look into what is the link between a certain trustworthiness dimension and a particular risk. So if we are trying to optimize for fairness, what is the relationship, for example, with reducing discrimination? That's obviously an easy example, but there are other examples that might be less obvious. The second thing that we might want to think of is that what is the link between setting a threshold on, for example, a group fairness metric, such as demographic parity, and in risk management, defining risk acceptability criteria and defining acceptable reduction in discrimination risk? So I think it's clear from these questions that there is some relationship between risk management and the whole methodology and processes that have been adopted within the realm of trustworthy AI research. So what I did next as a product manager was starting to think about, okay, when we talk about trustworthy AI by design and think about potential compliancy by design, how do these trustworthiness methods and concepts relate to risk management? So here I started listing different risk types. You have different trustworthy AI principles. So here you can see, okay, we mapped basically the trustworthiness principle of diversity, non-discrimination, and fairness. We map that to discrimination and coded bias risks. And then obviously within the Trustworthy AI methods, we could actually say that aligning on the appropriate fairness definition might be seen as some kind of a risk control, for example. Actually, adopting certain bias detection methods such as resampling could also be seen as a risk control. So that's actually how we defended ourselves, that our product was not only creating trustworthy AI solutions, but would also magically reduce certain risks. So in my opinion, I think we actually need to not assume that optimizing for trustworthiness automatically reduces risks of the AI system and reduces it to a level that is actually acceptable. So therefore, I think there is a need for deep integration between trustworthy AI and AI risk management. And let me clarify that a little bit. So when you look at trustworthy AI, it's basically mostly maximizing the trustworthiness of the AI system, which indirectly could reduce certain types of harm. So there's some kind of loose coupling between improving trustworthiness of a solution and reducing risks in practice. When you look at risk management, there the focus is very much on reducing harm. And depending on the particular standard that you are adopting, it might also look into the evaluation of risk acceptability, which might include risk-benefit analysis. So these are the two different areas of research that have been developed. And to the best of my knowledge, those two fields do not have a very tight integration at this moment in time. So my idea is that an AI system that is trustworthy and has its risks managed should ideally explicitly model the link between improving trustworthiness and reducing risk. So I'm more in favor of having some kind of strict coupling between trustworthiness and reducing risk. So in the next part of my presentation, I just want to go actually over potential ways of deep integration of risk management and trustworthy AI. First of all, I just want to indicate that this is just a vision, and I will coin some ideas of how or which type of integration might be necessary. But obviously, this is more like a roadmap for future academic research to look into how this integration might look like from a scientific point of view. So actually, a while ago, I actually looked also, one of the people who presented here before me actually indicated, okay, we're looking, I think from Fraunhofer, you looked into, for example, the value of assessment, auditing, and so on. So you're probably very much familiar with the framework provided by Floridi in 2021. Which was called, I think, an ethics-based auditing framework. So actually, I started from this framework from Floridi, but I also looked into the traditional risk management process. This time, I looked at the NIST AI risk management framework. So you can see here on the top that we have map, manage, measure, and monitor, which are actually typical steps in the NIST AI risk management framework. And then if you go back to the framework by Floridi, he actually is indicating that you need some translation between, on the one hand, law and ethics, and actually your AI system, and how you validate this, whether your AI system at the end will actually meet legal requirements, meet ethical guidelines and ethical requirements, and so on, through various auditing and certification systems. So one way to look at this, so you can see on the left-hand side, the blue boxes are law and ethics. So you could do some compliance mapping in the beginning to identify which regulations are actually applicable to my use case. Obviously, ethics is an important aspect when building trustworthy AI solutions as well. But then actually the green boxes are mostly related to trustworthy AI and auditing and this kind of stuff. And then the pink boxes are related to risk management. So one way of seeing this kind of integration from a very high level is that to this framework, you would actually add the risk management process steps, such as AI risk mapping and identification, AI risk estimation, AI risk treatment, and AI risk evaluation. You just put them in the translation and in the validation phase, and there is some communication of information between the AI risk evaluation and the AI risk treatment, which actually has access to information on the trustworthiness of the solution and can actually also recommend updates of the design based on assessments of the actual risk. This is a very high level view of integration. And then I started off thinking about what would a more tight integration look like. So I started thinking of how can we create a unified framework, which would mean that we would have shared objectives between risk management, AI risk management, and Trustworthiness AI. And that we also would have much tighter integration between building a trustworthy AI system and building a trustworthy AI system via risk management processes. So let me go into the two separate points of building towards a unified framework. The first thing is, I think, for me, the most critical one. So having experience with some experience with optimization in the past as an academic researcher, I recall that if you don't optimize explicitly for certain objectives, it doesn't magically happen. You just have to specify it as part of your objective function. So therefore, I think we really need to go towards a joint optimization of trustworthiness and minimization. So basically a maximization of trustworthiness together and jointly with minimization of risks. What this could mean is actually that we would need to get to some point where selecting the right risk controls depends on this shared objective function, where we know that we will maximize the trustworthiness of the system, but also will reduce a certain risk. The risk evaluation should also integrate and use the trustworthiness metrics that have been created and developed by different academic researchers. Some ideas, and this is just coining some ideas here, and I'm happy to hear how you would like to do this. So one of the ideas I had is what if you would define a multi-objective function, and you would apply multi-objective optimization where you try to minimize risk indicators while maximizing certain trustworthiness metric indicators. So there might be different ways here to go about it. It could be that you try to minimize risk by maximizing interpretability, explainability, and group fairness. But obviously, these functions are at this moment in time unknown. So one of the key challenges, I think, from a scientific point of view is actually to find out if you try to minimize discrimination risk of a certain nature, which trustworthiness dimensions, maximizing certain trustworthiness dimensions, which dimensions should you try to maximize in order to eventually reduce certain type of discrimination. A second option I thought of is actually, what if you would use some kind of reinforcement learning framework, where you basically see the trustworthiness methods as actions, and the reward or objective of the reinforcement learning system would be to reduce the total risk of the AI system. Also, obviously interesting here in this case is that you do have a feedback loop, because once you implement the AI system in production, you do no longer have just the estimated risk and the estimated probability of risk and estimated risk of severity of risk, but you can update your estimation of probability of risk with real incidence rates. And you can also update the severity of the risk by actually measuring the actual impact of the risk in reality as you have the system in production. So that makes it interesting probably for reinforcement learning as well. And finally, another option might be is that you actually decide to just, rather than having multiple objectives, is just to have one indicator that somehow represents both trustworthiness as well as the risk. These are just some ideas, but in essence, I think it's really necessary in order to build a system that maximizes interpretability, fairness, and so on, and at the same time tries to reduce privacy risks and discrimination risks, is that we come to some shared objectives. Secondly, I also think that a unified framework should try to get to some definition of the optimal integration of processes. And there again, from a pragmatic point of view, obviously people in industry will look into how can we integrate those processes to the best of our knowledge, but actually finding the most pragmatic way of integrating trustworthiness, building in trustworthy AI solutions and managing risk is not the same as finding the optimal integration between building trustworthy AI solutions and managing the risk. So what I did actually just to get started here is actually I did an analysis and a comparison between, on the one hand, the published standard on treating unwanted bias, which is ISO 12791, and I compared it with the draft AI risk management standard to see what are the similarities there between the different steps and activities mentioned in both processes. So when you look, for example, in that bias standard, you will see that in the inception phase, it indicates as an activity that you need to identify stakeholders and that you need to define the stakeholder needs and requirements, and that you should actually also identify which system aspects that can affect unwanted bias. So that's actually one of the requirements of that particular standard. When you look at the AI risk management standard, the draft one, I must say, there's actually also an indication that you need to identify risks, but as part of the risk identification, we indicate that you need to do risk identification based on AI system characteristics, which are related to health, safety, and fundamental rights. And then more specifically, we are indicating that you need to identify and document the qualitative and quantitative characteristics of the system that could potentially affect the health, safety, and fundamental rights of individuals or groups impacted by its use. So implicitly, we are also saying here that you need to do some kind of stakeholder analysis, but it's not stated as explicitly yet in the standards. So you can see that there is already, even without, actually at this moment in time, you can see that there is already some alignment in process between the AI risk management standard and then the standard on treating unwanted bias. Likewise, I think we also can continue the comparison. Just to give you some examples here, if you look at the inception phase of the bias standards, you will also see that in the inception phase, they're saying that you need to define the data sources and evaluate to what extent those data sources can actually bring unwanted bias. The second thing that is mentioned there is the integration with risk management. So I think that's very good that this bias standard is actually already alluding a little bit on how to integrate this bias treatment in the risk management process. However, I think the actual detail of how to integrate with risk management is still a little bit too high level. To actually enable a system that is maximizing trust as well as minimizing risks. So what they are saying here is that you need to identify hazards which can lead to unwanted bias. For example, incorrect use of labeling of data and AI systems mission and goals and so on. An organization shall assess and treat these identified risks to affected AI stakeholders. If you then look in the draft AI risk management standard, we are also obviously talking about the step where you identify the hazards. And we're also talking about risk control analysis and treatment. And then potentially we will also publish a risk catalog that will include that also covers bias as unwanted bias and hazards to related to bias. Very quickly now, in the interest of time, what is interested also is that the ISO standard is, for example, also hinting at defining acceptance criteria. But this time, actually, it's mostly related on putting acceptance criteria and thresholds on typical trustworthiness or group fairness metrics. For example, you could specify a maximum limit for false positives and for false negative rates as some kind of lower bound of acceptance. So there is already a hint of how you could define thresholds, in this case on predictive performance or on group fairness measures, as indicators of acceptable functional correctness or acceptable group fairness. Likewise, when you go to the risk management standards, there's also the identification of acceptance criteria. The key question I had here is actually, is it true that if you minimize false positive rates and protected groups, would that be the same as putting a threshold? Would that be a good threshold to actually minimize discrimination? And could we learn those thresholds? So these are some questions that popped up when comparing both approaches. This brings me to a very first attempt to try to integrate the risk management process with commonly known steps in the building trustworthy AI solutions. So at the top, you can see hazards. You have hazardous situation, harm. We have the estimated risk, and you have the actual risk. So the hazardous situation would be, for example, if you think about, for example, the Apple credit card scandal, where the wife was actually getting less credit than the man, and they actually shared the same accounts. So the wife was discriminated when applying for credits. Likewise, when you think about the Amazon scandal, there it was actually women applying for jobs having a lower probability of actually being hired. So the hazardous situation in this case is actually women are discriminated when applying for a loan or job. The harm is actually that the women do not get the credit, or do get less credit, or they are less hired. What are the hazards? So here I think there is a big opportunity to make a link between risk management and trustworthy AI as a discipline. When you look at the hazards are actually incorrect labeling of data, incorrect AI system goal definition, not covering the operational domain. That's another hazard, and there could be more. I just mentioned some. And likewise, when you look at the risk controls, that's where you try, obviously, to reduce the harm by actually also avoiding that the hazards will be present. So, for example, I could try to reduce the hazard of incorrect labeling of data by implementing a data labeling auditing process. Similarly, I could try to avoid the incorrect representation of the data, so not covering the actual operational domain definition, by actually making sure that I do some over and under sampling that is closer to the actual representation of women or how I would like to make sure that my AI system is actually also covering substantially also women. So these risk controls are actually all related to trustworthy AI methods, if you think about it. So in the end, we need to make sure that when we evaluate risks, that we actually do look into how to define the optimal risk controls on the one hand, but also when we evaluate the residual risk, and this brings me to the right-hand side of this picture, there's two things here. So you do have the estimated risk, which is typically something that you would have with a lot of uncertainty when you design and develop the AI system and your system has not been launched to the market. Then you will have to make some estimates of the probability of harm, and you also will have to estimate the severity of harm. But somehow, at this moment in time, there is no direct link between the trustworthiness metrics and how these relate to the probability of harm nor the severity of harm. So there's a couple of things here that I wanted to clarify, and maybe let's do it in a structured way so you can understand it. So first of all, there's the definition of acceptable risk. As I said, if I define thresholds on these trustworthiness metrics, such as group fairness metrics, is that the same as actually trying to define an acceptable level of discrimination risk? Big question mark. So this is one of the questions that I wanted to raise. The second thing is that when you do risk treatment, as part of the risk treatment process, you need to evaluate and do an analysis of the risk controls. At this moment in time, there is no clear understanding of to what extent a selection of a certain risk control actually will reduce a certain risk. So I think we need a much more tight link between selecting certain risk controls and the expected reduction in harm and the expected reduction in potentially the severity of the harm. So there again, I think there's a big opportunity to actually have some scientific research to define how we can choose the best risk controls in light of eventually reducing the probability of discrimination and the severity, the impact of the discrimination. So in conclusion, I actually try to highlight that both the fields of trustworthy and AI and AI risk management are very important fields. However, that actually we cannot assume when building trustworthy AI systems that magically all those risks will be reduced, and that is the best optimal way. So in my opinion, we need to optimize the trustworthiness of an AI system jointly with reducing the risks. My preference goes to a rather tight integration. And the key question I would like to address to you researchers is actually to do some scientific research to define shared objectives for jointly maximizing trust as well as reducing risk, and to define what is the best process of integration. I just tried to give you some hints of where I think there's integration possible, but obviously in order to really get and create AI solutions that maximize trust while also minimizing risk, we will need a very scientific approach to accomplish this. And we need to identify these scientific best approaches. Thank you very much. If you have some questions, I'm open for questions.
Yeah, thank you, Anita. I think what is really interesting in your talk is that when I say usually we assume that when we work on trustworthiness characteristics, we implicitly reduce the risk.
Mm-hmm.
But you are pushing towards making this explicit.
Yes.
And it's I would say it's a rather complex relation. In Confiance.ai, for example, we analyzed the different trustworthiness characteristics, and we listed something in I think 9 big categories of trustworthiness of characteristics, something like 100 different trustworthiness attributes.
Mm-hmm.
And then when we are working on the risk, and I'm working also in the risk standard, we have something like also 100 hazards or risk sources identified. So putting all this together, just for a small number of risk and attributes, is already a challenge. But then, when you have to look at everything, it makes things very complicated. But I appreciate your willingness to make it explicit. and pushing the research toward this direction. And I think it's really interesting. My other feeling is that you can only do this with systems which are where the final application is identified because of the severity of the harm and things like that. You need to know what you're talking about. So you cannot do it for a foundation model, for example, because you don't know what it's going to be used as. And opening I haven't seen yet people raising hands, or maybe there are some questions in the chat. No, there's just a compliment from Carla. Very good, Carla. Thank you. No, I'm not raising my hand. So it seems that you have been very clear. There's no question from the audience.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I know this proposal is quite, how would I say it, challenging. Because obviously, as Bertrand was saying, there's a lot of risks and there's a lot of different trustworthiness metrics and controls possible. But there is not yet a joint approach that would prove that maximizing trust is at the same time also minimizing certain risks.
If we had this miraculous solution, I think the European Commission would be very happy. Loïc, maybe you wanted to ask something. Loïc, I see that you're here.
No, I want to thank for the presentation, which is, yes, there's a lot of trade-off between all these attributes and risk, and agreed that sometimes improving trust, minimize performance, and minimizing performance enhance some risk. So yes, it's not automatic to have optimizing one will answer the second one. And so yes, your assumption was very great to put in the middle of our work.
There's a hand raised by Michel Barreto. Come on, Michel.
You're mute.
You're on mute.
Sorry. Yes, I was wondering if we have to work on that trade-off. Do we have to start by working on defense domain, because it's as they accept a given level of risk, maybe it's easier to find this trade-off between a certain level of trustworthiness and a certain level of risk before addressing civilian domain, where it's more difficult to find this connection between both. This is an open question.
Yeah, and I really think I was very much puzzled about what is the best approach. On one of my slides, I said, okay, maybe you need one indicator that actually includes somehow magically risk and trustworthiness dimension in one meta construct, meta concept. And you optimize for the subconstructs, and at the same time, you try to maximize the meta construct. That's one possibility. On the other hand, it might be from economical perspective that trustworthiness is a leading indicator of risk. Maybe indeed, if we improve certain trust indicators, this might be an early indicator that in the end, when we put the AI system into production, that certain types of risk will have smaller incidents. So there are kind of leading indicators for the eventual risk indicators. That's also a possibility, and you still keep the two categories of indicators, trustworthiness indicators and risk indicators, separately. But then still, in the end, I think we need a tight integration and some modeling between how optimizing for trust actually allows you to minimize certain risks. And maybe there is a need for additional risk controls that are not necessarily typical trustworthiness AI methods improving trustworthiness. It's just an open question, but I think as long as we do not explicitly model how adding certain trustworthiness risk controls improve reduction in certain risks, we will not know, but that these are sufficient. I see there's another question
by Futse.
Yeah, I had a question. I think you kind of touch it a bit on the economic aspect of it, right? Because sometimes when you try to improve trustworthiness, there may be a cost benefit analysis to do. And so, so when in this framework that you're proposing, do you see the economic risk to something that has to be also explicitly modeled, and then so control for trust, mitigating risk, and then factoring the cost benefit of implementing these controls? Like how do you see this? And
I think that would be a very good idea, actually, to include also the cost of implementing certain controls to improve trust or to reduce certain risks. Because, yeah, from my own experience as a product manager, actually, we first started off with presenting our product to improve trust. And actually, unfortunately, there were a lot of companies saying, actually, we do not want to pay extra for a trustworthy AI solution. We want, first of all, an AI solution that works. And then, yeah, it would be great if it's trustworthy, obviously. And then you have a different kind of companies that actually say, yeah, we are interested in your solution if you can prove that you reduce certain risks and that in the end, my legal compliance costs will be less. So it's obviously from a business perspective, it's always about cost benefits. And the question is indeed, if I add multiple methods to improve trust and I add some other controls to reduce certain kind of risks, and there's some relationships between those, yeah, how necessary are they? And that's interesting, I think, from a risk management perspective, where you actually look at when I add a certain risk control, and I verify the impact of adding such a risk control to see whether the residual risk has reduced. Is this still, if you look at the medical device standard that I referenced, ISO 14971, I think, they're looking into risk-benefit analysis. Whereas from the AI Act, it's mostly about avoiding risks as such. But from a business perspective, that's not the case. So I would argue that when looking at this problem, it would be very beneficial to account also for like the total cost of implementation and reduction in liability costs and for example also reduction in how would you say human cost, human impact, like emotional damage. It could be different factors.
I think if you allow me, I think in European context, so it might be different in Canada. In European context, sorry, I have a printer working behind me, so there will be some noise. I don't know. Sorry.
We don't hear it actually. So
okay. So when I was going to say that the AI Act and doesn't look at benefits. It only looks at risks, which means that whatever the costs are, what they want you to do is to reduce the risks to an acceptable level, whatever it costs. If you take examples from the medical domain, there's always the risk-benefit analysis. So we are going to do this operation because you have 1% chance of dying, but you have 99% chance of being better afterwards. Also. But it's not the case in the European law. You're supposed to reduce the risk to the acceptable level, whatever it will cost you. So, but it's sure that companies will look at the costs. So I don't know how things are going to take place, in fact, but we'll have to see. The EC, the AI Act starts to be operational. Starts to be enforced in 2 months for forbidden systems, and in something like 8 months for foundational systems. So we'll see how things are. And I don't know if people, but the idea of putting this explicit link if you are able to do an explicit modeling of all this and show it, let's say, to notified bodies in charge of verifying that you have taken the appropriate measures, then it's very interesting. Then it might help a lot, but it's very challenging.
Yeah, I was wondering if any of the researchers here today have ever looked into how to integrate the field of trustworthy AI with risk management, and what your thoughts were about this.
We have done it implicitly, but I don't think that we ever did it explicitly.
Okay.
I don't know. Is anyone wanting to add something on that? No, because it's time, because it's... no. So I think we can stop the discussion here. I stop the recording. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you.